Now, Arizona Democratic Senator Mark Kelly, welcome to Fox News Sunday.
Good morning, Shannon.
Okay, so all of the polling shows us the #1 issue for people across the country, and there in Arizona, too, is the economy. Majority of Americans now say that they feel like they're worse off economically than they were under President Trump. He's got an edge on that in every state where we've tested it. Here's what Reuters says. Voters in the 7 battleground states, including yours, that will determine the winner of the November 5th election have a negative view of the economy. 61% say it's on the wrong track. 68% say the cost of living is on the wrong track. But when the vice president was asked what she would have done differently than President Biden, she said she couldn't think of anything. So why should voters who their economic reality is very tough for them when it comes to gas and groceries and everything else put their trust in the vice president?
Well, Shannon, I think the vice president has made it perfectly clear that she is not going to be the same president as Joe Biden was. She has plans. Donald Trump has talked about having a concept of a plan. And when you consider the future of our economy, Kamala Harris is committed to bringing down the costs of things like groceries and health care and housing and education. Donald Trump's concept of a plan includes 20% tariffs on everything that comes into this country, which is going to mean an increase in costs of about $4,000 a year. And if you live here in Arizona, and this is really important, Shannon, Donald Trump last week said he was going to kill the CHIPS Act, which is bringing all these semiconductor manufacturing jobs. And just this week, the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, confirmed that if Donald Trump is president, they're going to end this program. Well, we're talking about tens of thousands of good-paying jobs.
The Speaker has made some clarification on that and said he misspoke or misheard a question when he was asked about the CHIPS Act, and there is no plan in the House or for the
Shannon,
Speaker to get rid of that.
And good evening. I'm Christy Castellano.
I'm Jeff Kulikowski. Congressman Brandon Williams says the House Speaker has apologized profusely, and that's a quote, over comments about the landmark legislation bringing Micron to central New York.
Speaker Johnson correcting in the last hour, dismantling the CHIPS Act is not on the agenda, despite saying a Republican majority probably will repeal it just hours earlier. News Channel 9's Andrew Donovan hearing those comments, trying to figure out what they mean.
About 200 people heard Congressman Williams' closing argument alongside Speaker of the House Mike Johnson. But it's what Speaker Johnson said after taking questions from reporters that's requiring damage control.
Are you guys trying to repeal that law?
I expect that we probably will, but we haven't developed that part of the agenda yet.
The CHIPS and Science Act, credited with bringing Micron's $100 billion project and 50,000 jobs to central New York. In real time, Congressman Williams tried to clarify the comments.
Being reelected, I will remind him night and day how important the CHIPS Act is, and that we break ground on Micron.
The Williams campaign says the House Speaker has since corrected himself. The congressman writes, quote, I spoke privately with the Speaker immediately after the event. He apologized profusely, saying he misheard the question. He clarified his comments on the spot, and I trust local media to play his full comments on supporting repatriation of chips manufacturing to America.
It is so important for national security and onshoring chip manufacturing here, this district being central to that. We want to do that. You'll have 100% agreement by President Trump and all the Republicans in Congress. What we were opposed to in that bill was that it had too much crammed into it.
I went back and listened multiple times to what he said and the question. It's very clear to me that he didn't misunderstand what was said there. He actually repeated part of the question in the answer and, said that if Donald Trump is president, they're going to end this program, which is probably the biggest foreign investment in our country. We're talking about from TSMC, $65 billion in the state of Arizona alone. Overall, the investment in Arizona is $100 billion from private companies.
Okay. His clarification was that they're not going to kill chips. I think that his follow-up was that they would like to better the program, that they would like to embolden and bolster it from his explanation. But again, that's coming from him. You heard it
Well,
one way. He says he didn't hear the question.
Yeah, but when you consider that and what he said and you combine it with what Donald Trump said, Donald Trump made it perfectly clear that program is dead if he is president again.
Okay,
I was with some iron workers just the other day, and these folks are going to lose their jobs if Donald Trump is president. And that's why I think we're seeing really high turnout here in Arizona.
So let's talk more broadly, though, about the economy, because there are people now who say
Sure.
that they're having a tough time struggling to put things together, 2 or 3 jobs to keep themselves
Understand
going.
that.
Horrible jobs report on Friday, and people want to point to a lot of different things, a couple big storms, but 12,000 jobs created, and those were government jobs. The private sector actually lost jobs in the last jobs report, and both August and September were revised downward for more than 112,000 jobs that were reported to happen that didn't happen. That follows earlier in the summer when we were told that the previous March to March, 818,000 jobs that were reported as created weren't created. So people are saying my personal situation, the way that I vote, is going to be impacted by what I'm experiencing, and it's not good. And they don't feel like they've heard enough. Even some Democrats will say from the vice president an articulation of why she didn't do things differently under this administration and how she's going to make concrete changes. So voters are left with that.
I think it simply comes down to the fact that she has a plan. And he, after 10 years of either running for president, being president for 4 years, then running for president again for 4 years, he has nothing to offer the American people except grievance and tariffs. And tariffs turns into taxes for families, $4,000 a year. It's in, the people around him put together Project 2025. That is really a bad deal for the American people. And these tariffs are going to be devastating for them, where Kamala Harris is going to give a tax cut for 100 million middle-class Americans. Donald Trump is offering to double down on his tax cut for billionaires.
What do you say, though, when you talk about tariffs, the fact that this administration, the Biden-Harris administration, not only kept most of the tariffs that the Trump administration had instituted, but they added their own as well?
Well, I think tariffs can be used for specific problems with countries in industries where there are unfair trade practices. And they've been used by multiple presidents over the history of our country. So in certain places, they make sense. But a tariff on everything coming into this country is going to raise the cost for American families. By economists say $4,000 a year. It's also going to be devastating to our economy. Donald Trump, he talks about how he went to Wharton Business School, but this very basic thing about how a tariff works, he just doesn't seem to understand it.
Well, people do have 4 years of President Trump. They know what the economy was like then. They know what their personal situation was like. They do, in assessing that against the last 4 years, feel better about how they were doing under President Trump. Unemployment hit new lows. We had to get through a pandemic, clearly, but poverty was down, home ownership was up, and prior to the pandemic hitting, people felt good about where they were.
Shannon, unemployment is at a historically low level right now. I understand that people still, and they're struggling with costs because of inflation, but inflation is also now down to 2.5%. And I'll come back to, Donald Trump's economy. He botched the handling of this pandemic. A lot of Americans lost their lives unnecessarily.
The numbers will show that more than half the jobs lost by the pandemic, by the time he left a year into it, they were back. The economy was running again to the assessment of most Americans that they felt hopeful.
All of those jobs were back under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. We're back down to historic unemployment. Donald Trump lost 200,000 manufacturing jobs. This wasn't because of the pandemic. This was because of his policies to overseas, to foreign countries. 200,000 good-paying jobs. When Joe Biden and Kamala Harris got into the White House, they worked with the United States Senate and the House in a bipartisan way to come up with programs like the CHIPS Act, bringing these manufacturing jobs back to the country. This was bipartisan legislation, by the way. This is the way that the government is supposed to work to benefit the American people. Donald Trump's entire presidency and now his campaign has been one about grievance. He talks about the enemies from within. Those enemies are people in the United States Senate, in Congress, that he wants to specifically go after. He's not a guy that's going to bring us together and solve these problems for the American people in a bipartisan way.
Okay,
Kamala Harris is committed to being a president for all of America.
Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit, because there's been a lot of language in the closing argument by the vice president that has referred to him as fascist, has talked about threat to democracy, existential threat, bad for the country, divisive, all of those things. So with that in mind, should he win the presidency, you're a member of Congress that will have something to say about that as the electoral votes come in. Would you, as a member of Congress, certify the votes for him should he win on Tuesday or whenever this election is decided?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you think the vice president would certify as well?
Yes, of course she would. I mean, and Republicans, some of them in the Senate, you know, we understand the importance of the functioning of our government and the peaceful transfer of power. Donald Trump doesn't. He seems to already be trying to set up the conditions where he could do what he did in 2020, do it all over again.
But he did leave in 2020.
But you're not going to. After he sent a mob to Capitol Hill, I was in the Senate chamber that day. There were people that died that day because Donald Trump refused to accept the election. If it turns out that he wins this election, you're not going to see the same thing from myself and my colleagues, including the vice president. I mean, she understands that the importance of in a democracy that you have to peacefully turn over power. And I will do my best if he was elected. I don't believe he's going to be elected, by the way. The momentum is on the side of Kamala Harris. The American people understand that she wants to be a president for everybody, not just the people who vote for her. Well, and here in Arizona, by the way, we have just yesterday, we knocked on 112,000 doors, made 600,000 phone calls. The energy in this state for Kamala Harris and Democrats, by the way, up and down the ballot, it's tremendous. And I think she's going to win here, and I think she's going to be the next president. Well, the country is definitely going to be watching Arizona as one of the big ones come Tuesday night and beyond. Senator, we thank you for your time.